This is YouTube Joseph WM Organism Profile Organism Profile Lystrosaurus. So I'm sorry, this month's one came late in the month. Today we're talking about one of my favorite prehistoric animals, Lystrosaurus. It was the most successful it was the most successful genus of terrestrial vertebrates ever. They survived, and they survived. They lived in the late Permian and early Triassic. They survived, and not only survived, they thrived in the aftermath of the Great Dying, especially within the first million years after the Great Dying into the Triassic. They range in size from beaver size to the size of a pygmy hippo. They were on average the size of a pig. At one point, they lived. At one point, their herds made up 75 or 85% of all the land vertebrates. They lived from 255 million to 248 million years ago. 255 million to 248 million years BC. The late Permian and early Triassic. And the fossils have been found in Africa, India, Asia, and Antarctica. In Asia, particularly China and Russia, and Africa, South Africa. India at that time was its own subcontinent, and India was connected to Africa and Antarctica at that time. Possibly hold on a minute. Never mind. They lived also in, fossils have been found in Mongolia. There were all right, let's go over every individual species. This is Lystrosaurus cuvironus, the one I showed in my sci-fi summer. Actually, it's this one lived at the Permian Triassic boundary. Cuvitonus, I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, coexisted with Lystrosaurus murray, which I'll get to later. And that's the wrong one. I'm not sure how big individual species were. They were noted for having being larger than their early Triassic counterpart. I think this was the hog-sized species, pig-sized species. I'm not sure. This is Lystrosaurus murray. I'm not sure where cuvironus was found. Murray was in the Karoo Basin, which is in South Africa. It was pig-sized. Not sure what size Murray was. It was abundant in the early Triassic, and also Murray. Moving on from Murray and decivis, which coexisted with Cuvironus decivis. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right. Coexisted with Cuvironus murray, the early Triassic. And then there's keep in mind that this species lived through the Great Dying, for all the climate change. I'm not going to get into that in this video. Survived and thrived in the year. And gave rise to probably Murray and decivis in the early Triassic. I'm not sure where they lived. All these species lived on the southern part of Pangaea, which was Gunwala. Magaroni. Now Lystrosaurus magaroni, which is one of the larger Permian species that not all of them made it. Like Lystrosaurus magaroni died out in the Great Dying. Magaroni died out in the Great Dying. It was specialized on a diet of Glossporus flora, which it was a prehistoric plant. Here it tells more information. There's one species I'm not sure. maybe I'll make a separate in-depth bone in the future. I mean, Lystrosaurus wetcheni. Magaroni, hold on them. Magaroni lived in South Africa in the late Permian. It was about 2.5 meters or 8 feet in length, and had a distinctly elongated sound. Lived just prior to the Great Dying. Cuvertus, Cuvertus lived late Permian, Triassic in South Africa and Antarctica. Was smaller and had is noted for its slightly longer snout, less robust, and was a key species that provided proof of continental drift. And identical fossils have been found thousands of miles separated by ocean. And then there was hold on. Now with Cuvironus Murray, I'm trying to find. Lived in the early Triassic from 251 to 249 million years ago in South Africa. Again, the Karoo Basin also lived in the Karoo Basin, and it was abundant. It was the most abundant species found. It was abundant. It's the most famous and abundant species lived during the early Triassic. It became hyper abundant at times, making up 95% of all terrestrial vertebrate fossils. I thought it was 70 or 85%. Different sources vary. And then moving on, it was 95% of all terrestrial vertebrate fossils found in the region. Moving on. Lystrosaurus, next. It was a the late Permian to early Triassic. Lived in European Russia, specifically the Volga River region, and was found outside of the southern. Oh, this one was found outside. I made a mistake. Now this one. Well, then this one was found outside of the Gondwana continent. Presence in Laurasia shows how widespread and adaptable it was across the early Pangea. Well, I don't think this was early. And then also, and then what's the last species? I think Macaroni is the last species in the late Permian. It lived in South Africa, and this was one of I already mentioned this one. That's not it. Mentioned that one. No, I'm not sure this one is. Sorry, I paused. This is the Cividae, Lystrosaurus decisiva. It's the one that coexisted with Murray before. Hold on, the Sisyphus. I already went over it. Anyway, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and share, and subscribe. As always, bye-bye.